Hello and welcome to Dialogue. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the Boao Forum for Asia. Over the past 20 years, the forum's scale and influence has grown considerably, and it has played a major role in deepening regional cooperation and solving Asian and global issues. With the world undergoing a century of great changes, how can China and the rest of Asia cooperate with each other to find new opportunities amid these changes? And how can the global economy be reshaped in a post-COVID era? To talk about those issues and more, I'm joined by Leslie Mastorp, Vice President and CFO of the New Development Bank at the 2021 Boao Forum. That's our topic. I'm Zhou Yue. Well, Leslie, this year marks the 20th anniversary of the Boao Forum. I know you are a regular guest to those panel discussions. What do you make of the changes of the topics at Boao, and what are the new signals that you sensed at this year's forum?
I think that understandably after COVID-19, as you know, during 2020, there was a significant focus on the more inward-looking policies that some countries signaled, a rise in nationalism, a big focus on deglobalization. I think this year you can see from the topic, the theme, and all of the workshops actually, there's a major focus on the opposite direction. How do we reinforce globalization? How do we reinforce regional integration, which is the theme around Belt and Road, and how do we have greater global collaboration? Because our economies cannot open up unless the pandemic is completely dealt with throughout the world. We cannot have vaccines only in some countries and not in others. So the theme very much this year is about deepening and reinforcing globalization.
What do you think is driving the change of tone in Boao? Is it COVID, or is it the change of seats in America politics?
I think there are a number of macro factors. The first one is a change in the global posture of the United States versus China. That certainly would be one driver. There's also another major theme very prominent on the agenda this year around sustainability and the fight against climate change. And there you see almost kind of opposing things happening, where there's a deepening of collaboration on sustainability and on climate change. You might have noticed that just after President Biden assumed office late January rather, one of the first actions he took was for the United States to rejoin the Paris Agreement. A couple of months earlier, in September 2020, you would know that President Xi at the United Nations General Assembly made this major commitment that not only will China commit itself to carbon neutrality by 2060, but it will aim to reach peak emissions by 2030. That 2030 target is a very ambitious and aggressive one. It means that over the next 9 years, the business models of companies, the programs and the roadmaps of state-owned enterprises and of cities have to change to ensure that China can meet those goals.
But you have to understand the political rhetoric has changed a lot, both in the United States and here in China. John Kerry has just wrapped up his visit in China, but still a lot of people are worrying whether China can work with the United States, who's growing more assertive and hostile towards the second largest economy.
I think, as you know, there is uniform and universal consensus around the need for global action to fight climate change. I believe that there will be a deepening of the collaboration between the United States and China, as is evidenced from former Secretary Kerry's efforts. But I think also in the context of COP26 that is taking place later this year, in the context that China has committed itself to 2060 carbon neutrality, and most of the G20 economies have committed themselves to 2050 carbon neutrality. I think the convergence of consensus around what needs to be done on that score will remain in place. It's difficult to predict other things, but there are a lot of indicators that the trends towards sustainability is now unstoppable. If you, for example, look at the letters to CEOs issued by the biggest asset manager, BlackRock, Larry Fink. If you look most recently, Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan issued a similar letter. you would see that the entire institutional investor industry is also reallocating capital towards sustainability, and companies are beginning to price in climate risk in the valuation of companies.
You mean all companies are priced that in?
I'm saying it is starting with the biggest companies, and they are trend setters, right? So that is going to lead to a momentum of change.
And policy-wise, what do you think that China and the U.S. can do in addition to what they agreed on the Paris Agreement in Biden's administrations?
I think regulation and setting policy is the one area where there can be significant collaboration. Over the last year and a half or so, I'd say that there's been a convergence of a number of trends. Firstly, you've seen a greater public awareness around climate change expressed in various forms. Consumer preferences, a lot of companies are now saying that consumers actually care what they buy.
Okay.
So that's the first major change. The second one is what I just made reference to, that companies are reallocating their investment decisions. And the third one is regulation and policy. In that area, that's where governments are the driving force.
Okay.
Governments have the capacity to set new rules of the game. And this is now happening where PBOC, Bank of England, for example, most recently, a couple of months ago, added the word transition to a net zero economy in the mandate of their Monetary Policy Committee. In other words, when those individuals who are on the Monetary Policy Committee set interest rates, they have to take that objective into
consideration. And I know that your institution, New Development Bank, has also helped its members to adjust to the profound changes brought about by the climate policies. Can you elaborate on what kind of policies that you've been touched upon?
Absolutely. So in March last year, as the pandemic grew in the BRICS countries, the New Development Bank put a $10 billion COVID response, emergency response program in place. So we made roughly $2 billion each, because we have 5 member countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And we have now substantially completed support to our member countries. So we are essentially designing ways in which we can support the economic recovery. Most of our economies, with the exception of China, have gone into recession. China, as you know, is the only G20 economy that had positive economic growth in 2020, but all the others have experienced serious contractions in growth.
Yeah.
So we have provided billion-dollar economic recovery loans each to our member countries to stimulate jobs, everything focused on how can we get the economy to be kick-started.
But every economy has its own problems and challenges. How are these loans being used and prioritized in different countries?
Yeah. So we do not have a standard set of measures that we are proposing to our countries. We work closely with each of our governments to ensure that we exactly meet that objectives, that the loans are designed in such a way that it reinforces the existing programs of the governments in those countries. So we're not trying to impose particular structures. In most countries, the biggest challenge have been massive job losses. So these economic recovery loans are focused on creating new job opportunities. In South Africa, for example, where I am from, we have just approved a $1 billion loan, which we approved a couple of weeks ago, and that is focused on creating 700,000 new job opportunities in South Africa.
Similarly, in 2020?
In 2021.
Okay.
So the programs differ in each of the 5 BRICS countries.
And have you evaluated the effectiveness of all those loans already?
It is still early days, so the loan has only just been approved recently, which means that the funds are only leaving the bank now, so it is too early to assess. We will only be able to assess this 9 to 12 months from now to look at the effectiveness of those programs. But we have, for all of our loans, we have rigorous evaluation measures in place.
There is another casualty of COVID, that is trade protectionism and nationalism around the world. Asian countries, of course, is also facing the similar challenges from advanced economies and between themselves. What is your assessment of the risks there?
As you know, Asia is now and has been for a while the sort of growth engine of the world economy. The fastest growing economies in the world are indeed located here, and the most substantial ones are located here. The most significant development, I would say, in response to your question last year, has been the signing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership.
RCEP.
That trade deal, RCEP, is the most significant trade pact of its kind. One, because of its sheer size, and two, also because China is the second largest economy, or $14 trillion economy, is part of that endeavor. So over the next 5 to 10 years, as that free trade agreement is implemented, it will deepen and solidify the regional integration in Asia. So the trend in Asia is not towards protectionism, is not inward looking, because there's a recognition that you only have vaccines for your own country, your country will still remain closed if everyone else is ravaged by COVID. People will not be able to travel, businesses will not be able to conduct business across borders, there'll be production stoppages and trade supply chain disruptions. So there's a recognition that there has to be further deepening of regional integration. And that's why the Belt and Road remains important.
But on one hand, there is regional integration, but on the other hand, there is fracturing of different trade agreements. For example, Europe is talking about their trade agreement. RCEP doesn't include all those advanced economies. WTO is going nowhere right now. Is it still possible that we have a global platform of trade investment treaty anytime soon?
I mean, as you know, there's now fresh leadership at the World Trade Organization. If you listen to the intent and the vision statements of Dr. Ngozi, who's the new Director General of the World Trade Organization, there's clearly intent to reinvigorate the multilateral trading system. It's clear that we have to reflect and look at the rules of the game. To remove the distortions, remove the problematic areas of the trading system, to ensure that trade is a reflection of the increasing integratedness and interdependencies of the world. I hear what you're saying, that there's a lot of trade frictions, but I think it's important to identify the fact that the World Trade Organization have indeed acknowledged that certain things needs to be rectified, and there needs to be fresh impetus for the way forward.
I think a lot of it depends on how America looks at trade, because obviously Biden looks at trade differently than Trump, but his version of multilateralism is still not the same as the Chinese and many Asians understand it.
From all the public pronouncements that I have seen since January, when the new administration have come in, they have re-emphasized the importance of multilateralism. I mean, everybody recognizes that we cannot solve global problems unless we take a multilateral approach, unless we use the global institutions that we have created for this purpose, whether it be the United Nations, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, all the other multilateral World Trade Organization that exist. So the posture of the new administration in the United States is clearly different, and they have indicated that they intend to adopt a multilateral approach to solve global problems.
And both America and China are harboring ambitious goals in infrastructure, especially green infrastructure development. So will the new development bank consider increasing their proportion of green infrastructure investment in the future, and what kind of portfolios will that be?
As we said earlier on, we are now at an historic turning point. We are at a major transformation moment right now, and that transformation moment has been brought about by the major economies in the world committing themselves to this green transition to net zero in 2050. The implications of that commitment is that new investment required in energy, for example. China already now is the largest producer of renewable energy in the world. But China is still 28% of the world's emissions, almost 1/3 comes from China. So China has a huge responsibility, if you like, to play a leadership role in this energy transition that is happening throughout the world. A big part of that is infrastructure. So as a new development bank, and so also the Asia Development Bank, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, World Bank, all the multilateral institutions will in future commit most of their resources to climate finance, most of their resources to infrastructure that is climate resilient. So the short answer to your question is yes, we intend to invest more in green and sustainable infrastructure, whether it be water, smart agriculture, new green buildings, for example, energy efficiency, water purification, and so on.
By February 2021, we have seen 186 regional trade agreements inside and outside Asia. That's 54% of the total regional trade agreements. You mentioned RCEP, but that hasn't included services and digital.
Yeah.
What will be the next step of trade agreements in this part of the world?
It's been difficult for me to predict with any precision what that might be. I would say certainly for the RCEP, the one big gap is the absence of India, right?
Okay.
So I would say going forward, the inclusion of India as a major economy in Asia has to be one of the major considerations.
What is keeping India from moving one step further?
It's difficult for me to say because I'm not close enough to those negotiations. I'm just referring to what has been in the public domain. But I'd say the issue around services becomes also very, very critical. So technology, digital, and services will be the key sectors that will need to be considered.
But the rules on those haven't been very much clarified.
Not yet, that's correct. That's right.
So people still need to work on it.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about investment. According to the data from China's Ministry of Commerce, in 2020, the direct investment in the Belt and Road countries has jumped by 18%. So does that mean the investment of Chinese companies is going up again after 2019 because of Trump administration's curve? It is going down.
I think 2020 in every respect, as you know, has been an aberration. So, it's difficult to look at any numbers now and to look at trends emanating from that. There has been, in some instances, some projects have literally ground to a halt as a consequence of 2020 and the production stoppages, the successive lockdowns in a number of countries. I think that the momentum towards further investment in infrastructure in the region will continue. There is so much desire and need for more infrastructure investment, whether it be the upgrading of ports to facilitate trade, whether it be expanding the renewable energy networks in both solar as well as offshore wind, hydro, and so on. There's an increased demand in many of the countries in the region for new investment.
Apart from COVID, what might be the other factors, or should I say the white swan events that might upset global economic recovery in 2021?
I think there's a lot of eyes obviously will be focused on whether this, what one can call inward-looking, more nationalistic approaches that have emerged in 2020, whether that will be reversed, because that will put a dent to the global recovery. The second aspect will be whether countries commit to a green recovery. There is very strong push right now, not just in China, but also from the EU, to ensure that the fiscal stimulus, for example, that has been put in place, there has been, the IMF estimates something like $14.5 trillion have been earmarked in 2020, almost 13% of global GDP for fiscal stimulus. There's a requirement or a desire to ensure that that money is spent in such a way that it enables a green recovery. So almost that we should put green, sustainable conditions with that. So the extent to which countries agree on that let's use this quantitative easing, this kind of this low interest rate environment of much cheaper money in such a manner that it also contributes towards the agenda against climate change.
So what do you think the Chinese government should guard against among all those things that you mentioned, which is the number one threat?
I mean, I'd say that there is clear evidence right now of a commitment by the Chinese authorities, and I go by the 14th five-year plan, which reinforces and talks about the importance of, I think it's called ecological civilization, which is really about the green transition in China. Yeah. As I mentioned, if you intend to have a kind of economy as big as this, reach peak emissions by 2030, there'll be significant changes will be required in almost every industry, in heavy industry, in energy, in transport. You need smart mobility. So a lot of these commitments are codified in the 14th five-year plan. So it looks like there is momentum towards the Chinese government giving leadership to that green recovery agenda.
And the Chinese has a good track record of delivering on those targets.
Sure. I mean, when I arrived here in China, I mentioned this to you before, I think in 2015, the green bond market was a small component of the overall interbank bond market. That market has grown to hundreds of billions, and in China alone and globally almost reaching $1 trillion. So over the last 5 years, there's been significant improvements and increases. Once you have leadership, decisive leadership, you can see the change happening. 90% of the electric bus fleet in the world are here in China right now. 50% of the electric vehicles produced in the world are produced here in China. Most of the renewable energy footprint in terms of the grid is in China. So with decisive leadership, you can have those numbers indicating the progress.
Yeah, as you said, there's a political will, there's a way.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Leslie.
Thanks for having me.
And in the second half of this program, we'll be talking to Professor Edmund Phelps, 2006 Nobel Laureate. Stay with us. Mr. Phelps, how do you see the impact of COVID on the dynamism and innovation in China and around the world? It is providing more incentives to innovate, or it serves as a drag?
This is an event that we have no experience with, or very little experience with. So I think everyone has to rely on a bit of guesswork. I don't have any strong opinions about it. I do notice that in America, they're looking forward to rapid growth for the next several years. So that's interesting. And I think the Chinese are looking for rapid growth too. So maybe these forecasts presume that COVID-19 is not going to be all that important in the long run, or the medium-term future.
You observed in your white paper that the West is in crises, and COVID exacerbated the crises. What kind of crises do you mean?
Well, I was thinking mainly of the social problems in America, and to a lesser extent, but to some extent, in France and Germany and Britain. There is a lot of resentment, a great deal of unrest.
And do you think it has its roots in economic stagnation?
We can hope that the economy will manage to progress despite these grave social problems, but that's not certain.
And do you think some of those social problems can find its roots in economic stagnation and inequality?
That's a very interesting question. I think that the tensions about inequality are partly a result of the slowdown of the U.S. economy that began in the early 1980s. If we had not had that slowdown, everybody would be just as happy now as they were in the 60s and 70s. But once the growth stopped, with the exception of the 10 or 12 wonderful years of the information revolution, when the growth stopped, people started looking at how they're doing compared to the other people, and they were not happy. And so I do think that the slowdown of growth has something to do with the social problems. And then, as I was saying before, once the social problems develop, once these antagonisms develop, then that's not good for the economy either.
Let's come back to China, because in 2016, you said China is was not familiar with dynamic economy, but you changed your position in 2019, saying China could break loose with a long wave of rapid innovation. So how do you see the current state of innovative capability of the Chinese economy?
I'm sure that China could harness more widely its existing capabilities, more new entrants, more finance from the banks to innovative companies. I think there's lots of room for gaining faster growth in China through indigenous innovation right down to the small firms in the Chinese economy.
Yeah, there isn't a shortage of entrepreneurs and engineers and scientists in China, but people still saying it is a uphill battle for China to innovate up the ladder. What do you think are the biggest challenges for China to move up the value chain?
A point that I want to emphasize is that China would be making a big mistake if it looks for its innovation mainly to the big state-owned enterprises. I think it has to look mostly toward the private sector. There's plenty of room for the state-owned enterprise. I'm not suggesting anything with regard to them. I'm only making the point that China has a spectacular resource there. It's got a big private sector, and it's got a huge population.
And many successful private businesses like Alibaba and Tencent.
It has tremendous opportunities to create new methods of production and new products to make. But it's been one of the obstacles is the banking system, which is afraid to lend to lots of these small companies for fear of losing money.
Do you think right now China is on the threshold of out-innovating the West and the U.S.?
Well, we're talking about two unknowns here.
What are the unknowns?
The future of innovation in China and the future of innovation in America. So
any indicators that can tell us some signs?
I am not sure that China is out-innovating the West yet. But that may happen pretty soon. A lot depends upon the extent to which America can get its innovation going again.
And going forward, in your opinion, what might be the major economic risks to both China and the United States?
Well, I don't know what the greatest risk is, but I can imagine there is a risk that the U.S. government and the China government will not succeed in reaching a mutually gainful trade agreement.
Are we moving closer or further apart?
We're closer together than we were 40 or 50 years ago, but we're not as close as we were for a while. So we'll just have to see. Americans are a bit optimistic, and I think we can hope that maybe lots of things will get sorted out, and both China and America will get on a good track and begin to prosper more than it has been over this past difficult decade.
All right. On that optimistic note, we have to wrap up the interview. Thank you very much, Mr. Phelps. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the interview. Enjoyed it.
And that's it for this edition of Dialogue on CGTN. I'm Joe in Beijing. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.